Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today we are taking a look at the 4 seed from the Western region in the 2022 season, the Houston Outlaws, who, despite being the 6th seed overall in the playoffs and going into the 4 seed in the Western region, they finished 3rd in the playoffs with an incredible run, losing only to the Dallas Fuel and the San Francisco Shock. So really, really, really good performance from them in the playoffs, and they look to kind of take 2023 by storm. We take a look at their roster, which is a pretty big all-star roster. So let's take a look at it and talk about it. You can see it here. Houston Outlaws, 5-man roster at the moment. Pelican, the only returning piece from last year's team. And then in free agency, they added Fearless, Shoe, Happy, and Violet. So a lot of pieces on this team. Very interesting team. So let's jump in and let's talk about it. Let's start with the DPS, Pelican, and Happy. Happy, of course, was on this team back in 2021 before leaving for Washington, getting traded to the Gladiators, and now returning to the Houston Outlaws. So he is a player who we can look at as someone who's been on this team before, but nobody who is on the team with him now was on that 2021 roster. So it's a very new team, but technically he is a returning piece, though, just not from the 2022 season. And you pair him with Pelican, of course, the 2021 Rookie of the Year when he was with the Atlanta Reign, and also a very good player last year. Part of one of the best duos in the league, him and Merritt. Of course, Merritt is now gone, but Pelican remains as the kind of figurehead for this roster. And they pair him with Happy, who I actually think had a very good year last year, despite the fact that the Justice couldn't really get it together throughout the season, and after he joined the Gladiators, the team kind of struggled a bit on the team, or as a team. I don't think Happy was the problem. Actually, he had a very good time with the Gladiators. Most of the problems with that team were not his fault. He played pretty well, and I think this is a good duo for this team. They have the obvious problem that comes with only having 2 DPS players, that they don't have the incredible amounts of flexibility I would like out of this team. They don't really have great double flex support play, or double hit scan play, though Pelican is a very good tracer. He has played a very high level tracer, so that at least is something that they have figured out. But this isn't a team that I'd feel super confident in like Genji Tracer metas, for example. I don't think they have, Pelican is their Genji player. Happy's not an incredible Tracer player. He's okay. He's not great on the hero. I would rather them have a secondary hit scan player just in case. I think Flora would be a decent fit for this team. I talked about him with Dallas as well, but I think he'd be a good fit on this team. Just someone who can fill in kind of to be that secondary player in kind of hit scan metas or stuff like that. But generally speaking, I think this is a solid duo that plays pretty much everything you would need out of them. I think, generally speaking, most of the time, it's going to be one of the ones that's a good thing. But I do have concerns about the overall flexibility, because I don't think Pelican and Happy combined will be able to cover everything. It should be noted, like I said, this is a 5-man roster at the moment. There has to be at least one more player on this roster before the season starts. So at the very least, they will have one more player on this roster. I don't know where that will be, but they will have to add one more player at some point. So we'll see who that is. But I'm not too concerned about this team because of that. They have, I think, 2 potential spots on this roster where I'd like to see them add players, but I still think this team is in a really good spot, and I like a lot of what they've had on this team and what they've added so far. So it's good. I like it. But Pelican and Happy, very good players. Both can play lots of different heroes in the kind of categories they're in. Happy, I actually think his Sojourn was very good last year. I thought he played a very good Sojourn. He's not quite Merit levels, but still very good. I also thought that his, of course, Widow and Ashe, as always, look very good. Pelican, get him on his best heroes, and he's pretty much unstoppable. He's an elite player. So they have two very, very good players, but I'd like to see him add a little bit more depth and flexibility to the DPS line, but it could be worse. They're in a similar position to Dallas, where they have two very good players, and even like San Francisco, where they have two very good players in the DPS role, and they'll be fine, 95% of the time, but there's always a chance they run into a meta where they just don't have what they're comfortable with, much like what Chengdu was last year, and they just don't have the overall flexibility, but I still think this is a really good team in that DPS line, and I think that they will mostly find success. The Houston Outlaws were very good last year, despite the fact that they only had two DPS players, really, for the entire season, so we'll see. I think you have two relatively flexible players who can kind of flex over to the other roles, so we'll see what happens. I think that DPS is probably the second place I would like to see them add a new player in their overall roster, but I still think, for me, the thing that would make them a championship contender would be adding someone just in that spot. But let's move on and talk about the supports for this team. They have two supports on this roster, Shu and Violet. Both of them free agency signings. Shu, of course, played last season as a member of the LA Gladiators the past 2 seasons, and then was on the Guangzhou Charge the previous 2 seasons. Violet has been on the San Francisco Shock since 2019, or I should say since the 2019 season. So very, very, very good players from very good teams that come into this team to make up the support line here. There's been some rumors about Skewed also joining this team. I tend not to buy into those at the moment, just because I think when you have Shu and Violet, there's not really a reason to have Skewed on the team. He'd be a third flex support, which just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, so I don't really see it happening, but keep your eyes out for the potential signing there. But I like Shu and Violet. I think it's a really good duo. I think despite the fact that Violet is a flex support player, generally speaking, obviously he played flex support with the Shock for a long time, playing a lot of Zen, playing a lot of Batiste. He picked up the Lucio in 2021 and was much better on the hero in 2022. And I think of all of the DPS players, flex support players that made the change to Lucio last season, I think Violet was the one who made that switch the best. And you put him alongside Shu, who is going to be an incredible flex support player, who has been arguably the best flex support player for the past 2 seasons, if not the best, one of the best. He is incredible. He was one of the best players in the Gladiators consistently, and I think he is a huge addition to this team. You pair him with Violet, and you have 2 very talented players who really can kind of give you everything you need in the support line. You can get double flex support out of them. You can get Lucio with Violet. So one of those situations where it's very rare that I look at a support line and I think you don't feel complete or you should add a third player. This one, I think they're fine, right? This support line and the San Francisco Shock support line are 2 very good, very flexible support lines that I think you can get double flex and kind of your primary and most likely main support hero in Lucio without really needing anybody else on the team. That's the direction the game has gone in. It's very unlikely we see Mercy at a high level in the Overwatch League. It's almost always Lucio. It's almost always double flex support. That's usually what we get. So this is a fantastic support line for that. And I think when you really kind of look at last year's success for Violet on the Shock, on Lucio, I feel very confident this is a good duo here that will do a lot of really, 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 really high-level stuff for this team, and I really like what they've done, so I'm very excited to see this team going into, or the support line going into the 2023 season. I think it's the best part of the roster for sure, and I think it's the place where they excel the most and where I think there is the least amount of doubt about this roster. Finally, they have Fearless, formerly of the Dallas Fuel and the Shanghai Dragons. He is now the solo tank for the Houston Outlaws. This is, in my opinion, where I think this team should most consider bringing in a second player to help out with this roster. It's not because Fearless is bad. Obviously, that isn't the case at all. He was the Grand Finals MVP last year. But Fearless is a main tank player. He's known for his Winston. He's known for his Reinhardt. He's known for his Wrecking Ball. That's really what his bread and butter is, especially the Winston. And he's very, very good on those heroes. We have not seen Fearless really be the player to play stuff like D.Va, like Junker Queen, stuff like that, Sigma. And I think that, for me, is really where this team, I think, could potentially run into its biggest problems. I loved the Outlaws last year. I thought that was their biggest flaw last year. As good as Dante was, I don't think he was enough to bring this team the success they needed. The dominoes fell in quite a few places for them throughout the season that allowed them to kind of be an elevated team. But to me, they needed another tank player to be able to fill that out. And they did bring someone in. They brought in Doge. But he just didn't really do... He didn't play at the level they kind of needed him to, and so their team kind of had some issues. Obviously, they Piggy too, so it wasn't the only problem. But I think down the stretch, that was the thing that concerned me the most. And it once again concerns me here with this team. I think they need another tank player. I think Fury would be an interesting addition to this team who could be a really good fit. Veteran guy, knows his role in the team, knows he's a flex tank guy. Really good D.Va, really good Sigma. I thought his Junker Queen was pretty good last year. I think that's a somewhat hot take, but I thought he played pretty well, except for a couple of moments where I thought not great. But to me, if you have Fearless and Fury, that would be a really solid tank line. That really gives you everything. Fearless is incredible, and I'm not going to deny that Fearless is an incredible player, and as much as you can play Fearless, you should. In a Winston meta, there is no one I want to tank more than Fearless, except for maybe Gushue. But Fearless is an incredible talent. He is one of the best tanks in the league. He's one of the best tanks in Overwatch history at this point in time. He has cemented himself as an all-time great. But I don't think he has the flexibility that this team needs to be a championship caliber team. So as much as I would like to see them add another DPS player, I think it would help their roster. I think it is more important they get another tank player to be the second fiddle to Fearless to fill in for where Fearless's weaknesses are as a tank player. What Fearless is good at? One of the best in the league. But that doesn't mean you should set him up for potential failure by forcing him onto heroes that he's not necessarily as good at, like stuff like D.Va, like Junker Queen, like Sigma, like Zarya, whatever. That, to me, is the only thing I think really needs to be the focus for the Houston Outlaws. So if they rock with a six-man roster, I'd like to see them get an off-tank. Because I think having an off-tank player who can play the tank, whatever tank at a high level, I think that opens up the DPS players to not have to be as kind of solo carrying. I think if you are able to bring someone in like Fury and you get into a D.Va meta or something, or a Sigma meta or whatever, and you can basically run what you need to run, and you maybe have Pelican slightly off-rolling or Happy slightly off-rolling. If that's the only player who's slightly uncomfortable or slightly off-roll, I think this team's in a really good spot. So that's my opinion. I think that's really what I would like to see. But at the core of this roster, this is a very good five-man roster. And I always kind of view rosters in terms of how good do I think they are on the perfect day. And on the perfect day, this is a championship roster. This is a roster of players who have won championships with Pelican, have played in championship games with Pelican, and have won kind of titles, whether it be season or stage titles. Shu has won stage titles. Happy has won a stage title. Violet has won 2 championships, played in championships, played in stage title games. All of the players on this team have at the very least played in a stage championship. Pelican's the only one that hasn't won anything, technically. So this is a very good team with a lot of very talented pieces. But I think there are a couple areas they need to bolster their roster just to make them a little bit more meta-proof. But on their best days, if this was the team in the playoffs last year, for example, I think that they easily could have been one of the favorites to win. Because I think when you have Fearless and you get into any kind of Winston meta, you're always going to be there. You're always going to be comfortable. You're always going to be playing well. For me, it really just comes down to, can they bolster out this roster, build it out in a way that they don't really have those same weaknesses in certain metas, which is always the idea. You want to build teams that are meta-proof, because when you're meta-proof, you really don't have to worry about what happens when the meta shifts, right? Oh, we're in a diva meta now? Cool, put in our diva player. Put in Fury or whatever. So this is a team I'm most interested in seeing what their next signing is, even more so than Dallas. I think Dallas most likely brings in another DPS player. To me, there's kind of interesting spots there, but I trust Hanbin to flex more than I trust Fearless. Just because we've seen Fearless struggle on some heroes in the past. Remember back in 2020, his Orisa was a little weak, and they had Stand 1 playing Orisa a lot on Shanghai. So I'm most curious to see what this team does, because I think whether or not they sign another DPS player or another tank player has huge implications on this team's success. And so I'm very intrigued by where this team goes over the next couple of weeks, next month or so, as we get kind of close to the season. But I think it's a really good team. And I think they have one of my favorite rosters in the Western region, or just that we've seen in general right now. Who knows where this roster will end up. But right now, I feel like it's in a very good spot. It's one of my favorite rosters, and I'm excited to see where this roster ends up when we get into the season. Let me know your thoughts on this Houston Outlaws roster in the comments down below. Who do you want to see them add as their 6th player, or at the very least, what role would you like to see them add? Do you want to see them add another DPS player, another hit scan player, or would you like to see them add an off tank? Do you think, no, they need a proper main support player? Whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. And of course, as always, if you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more like it in the future. I'll be back on Monday with another roster breakdown, the Atlanta Reign roster breakdown, which is going to be quite a juicy one, considering their signings from this offseason. So if you want that and you're excited for that, make sure to like, subscribe, so you can be updated when that happens. But that's all for today. Thank you all once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.